Welcome, everyone. Hope everybody is doing well. I know in a time like this when the world's kind of in a bit of a mess right now with the pandemic going on and then lots of things being shut down. I hope everybody is doing well, and it's a great time that we can go into God's Word a little bit here and focus our minds on this for a while. So this is the second video of this series titled "What Can We Learn From?" Last video, we looked at the life of Noah and his obedience towards God. Today, we're going to look at the life of Joseph. And Joseph has lots of lessons that we can learn from throughout his life. But today, we're going to look specifically at forgiveness when it comes to Joseph. And so we'll give a brief background of the life of Joseph and the things of his interaction with his brothers and how he reacted to his brothers and the forgiveness that he showed. So we're introduced to Joseph in Genesis chapter 37. The account of Joseph goes all the way from chapters 37 to 50. And so we're introduced to Joseph in Genesis 37, where he is introduced as the 11th son of Jacob, but the first son of Rachel. Now, Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other brothers. He loved him because Joseph was born to him at an older age, and he was born to Rachel. And so Jacob showed his favoritism towards Joseph. He made this ornate robe for him, and he treated him very, very well. So much that his brothers knew that Joseph was the favorite. And Joseph's brothers really hated him because of this. They saw how much Jacob favored Joseph, and they really hated Joseph for it. In Genesis chapter 37, Joseph tells his brothers that he's had this dream. And he tells them in this dream, which is going to become the future. And so Genesis 37, verses 5 through 8, says, Then Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf rose up, and also stood erect. And behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf. Then his brothers said to him, Are you actually going to reign over us? Or are you really going to rule over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. After this, Joseph's brothers already hated him. And now Joseph is saying, essentially, I'm going to rule over you and you're going to bow down to me at some time in the future here. And so his brothers hated him even more. And so they had this plot to kill Joseph. They wanted, they went out into the wilderness and they had this plan to kill him. But the oldest brother, Reuben, stopped them from killing him. And so another brother, Judah, he wanted still to get rid of Joseph. So he found an opportunity to sell him off as a slave. And when some merchants came by, that opportunity arose. And so they took off his robe, dipped it in blood to convince their father when they went back home that Joseph had been killed. So Genesis 37, verses 18 through 28, give us this account of what happened. When they saw him from a distance and before he came close to them, they plotted against him to put him to death. They said to one another, Here comes the dreamer. Now then, come and let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. And we will say, A wild beast devoured him. Then let us see what will happen and become of his dreams. But Reuben heard this and rescued him out of their hands and said, Let us not take his life. Reuben further said to them, Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit that is in the wilderness, but do not lay hands on him, that he might rescue him out of their hands to restore him to his father. So it came about when Joseph reached his brothers that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the very, very colored tunic that was on him, and they took him and threw him into the pit. Now the pit was empty without any water in it. Then they sat down to eat a meal. And as they raised their eyes and looked, behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming from Gilead, with their camels bearing aromatic gum and balm and myrrh, on their way to bring them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, What profit is it for us to kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers listened to him. Then some Midianite traders passed by. So they pulled him up and lifted Joseph out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. Thus they brought Joseph into Egypt. So here, Joseph's brothers saw an opportunity to get rid of him. They didn't want to quite kill him. They weren't really happy to do that, as he was still their brother, but they needed to get rid of him. And so when they found this opportunity to sell him off, they thought, hey, here's a good chance to sell him off. We'll convince our father that he was killed, and we'll go on with our lives. So after they sell him off, Joseph ends up in Egypt. And Joseph was sold to the high-ranking official named Potiphar. And so Joseph was really well-liked, and he was very well-trusted. And he became very powerful in Egypt, one of the most powerful men in Egypt. And so over time, a famine struck. And so everyone in the area needed to come to Egypt for assistance. And so Joseph's brothers needed to come and ask for help. So when Joseph's brothers came into Egypt, they came in front of Joseph, but they didn't recognize him. And I encourage you to go into Genesis and read the account of everything that happened with Joseph in Egypt and with his brothers. But for this video, we're going to skip ahead of that and go to when Joseph revealed himself to his brothers. So eventually, after some time, Joseph finally told his brothers who he was. And in Genesis 45, verses 1 through 5, we see what happens when Joseph does this. It says, Then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried, Have everyone go out from me. So there was no man with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. Then Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, Please come closer to me. And they came closer. And he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. Now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. A little while later in Genesis 50, after Joseph's father had died, his brothers came back. It says, Then his brothers also came and fell down before him and said, Behold, we are your servants. But Joseph said to them, Do not be afraid, for I am in God's place. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive. So therefore do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. So he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Here we see Joseph introducing himself to his brothers and saying, It's me, it's Joseph, it's your brother, the one you sold into Egypt. But don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of how powerful I am. Don't think that I'm so angry with you. Joseph understood that God had put him there. God had a purpose for Joseph, and Joseph understood that. And so when he talked to his brothers, he wasn't angry with them that they sold him off into Egypt. Joseph knew that he was doing God's plan, and he fully forgave his brothers. He told them that he was there to preserve life, including their own. Joseph showed total forgiveness to his brothers, even after his brothers was willing to, plotted to kill him and eventually then sold him off as a slave. Joseph still was able to forgive them. Now, when we look forward in our lives, as we look at this story, we're not going to go through many of the things that Joseph did. Most of us aren't going to go through those sorts of hardships. But we will go through times when people treat us poorly. There will be a time when people come and treat us badly. And we have to be prepared to how we are going to respond to that. How are we going to react when we're treated poorly? When we look at the example of Joseph, we know that we need to show forgiveness. That no matter how many bad things happen to us, no matter how bad it really was, we need to be able to show forgiveness to people. And understand that we can show God's light in the way that we react to people, in the way that we show forgiveness. Especially in times when most people wouldn't forgive, when we are able to forgive, we show God's love. So we can look at this example of Joseph and know that if Joseph can forgive his brothers for the things that he did for him, then we know we can also forgive people. Thank you for the time. This is the video series on Joseph. Please stay tuned for future videos. Probably next week, and we'll come out with another one. So hope everyone has a good week and a good weekend. Hope everyone is doing great, and God bless.